When you spend $2 million on a hypercar, you assume you own it. Your name is on the title. You have the keys. You paid in full. But the moment something goes wrong, and eventually something always goes wrong, you discover that ownership is not quite what you thought. Because the manufacturer still controls the parts. They control the diagnostic software. They control who is authorized to touch the car, who can reset its systems after a repair, and in some cases, whether the car will even function at all without their explicit sign-off. You bought the machine, but in a very real sense, you never fully took possession of it. That's not a glitch in the system. It is the system. On the surface, a Bugatti looks like a completely unique machine, a monument to engineering excess, built from the ground up for one purpose. But underneath that carbon bodywork, Bugatti operates inside the Volkswagen Group ecosystem. The same industrial group that owns Audi and Porsche, that manufactures components at scale for mass-market vehicles across dozens of model lines. Some of the technology inside these ultra-exclusive machines traces back to platforms developed for far more accessible cars. And once a component crosses into hypercar territory, once it gets repackaged, rebranded, and installed into something wearing a $2 million price tag, the cost attached to it transforms dramatically. We're not talking about a modest premium. We're talking about multiples. Sometimes extreme multiples. A part that costs a few $100s in another application can become a five-figure line item the moment it enters the hypercar supply chain. And the only authorized place to source it is through the manufacturer. There is no alternative. By design. Now consider what happens when that car breaks down somewhere outside the manufacturer's network. Not in Monaco. Not outside a dealership in Stuttgart. Imagine it happens in rural Australia, or South Africa, or somewhere in Southeast Asia where the nearest authorized service center is thousands of kilometers away. The car won't run. It can't be diagnosed without proprietary software that only factory-trained technicians are licensed to access. And it cannot be repaired by the independent shop around the corner, even if that shop employs some of the most skilled and experienced mechanics in the country. Their talent is irrelevant. Without manufacturer authorization, the car stays broken. So what are the owner's options? They arrange transport, at their own expense, often across an ocean. The car then enters the manufacturer's service system, where it gets assessed and repaired on their timeline, at their pricing, using their parts. The transport alone can cost tens of thousands of dollars before a single bolt has been turned. The manufacturers have a ready answer for this, and it sounds reasonable on the surface. They'll tell you the system exists to protect the vehicle's integrity, to protect the safety of the driver, that these machines operate at performance levels so extreme, tolerances so fine, systems so tightly integrated, that only factory-trained hands should be working on them. That independent repairs introduce risk, liability, and potential damage to the vehicle's engineering reputation. And there is a version of that argument worth taking seriously. These are genuinely complex machines. The performance envelope is unlike anything in mainstream automotive. The engineering involved is extraordinary. But here's the question that argument can't quite escape. If safety and quality are truly the only motivations behind this system, why does every single element of that control structure also generate significant recurring revenue? Why do the parts pricing, the service rates, the transport requirements, and the diagnostic software restrictions all point in exactly the same financial direction? At some point, the safety argument starts to feel less like a protection and more like a justification, a credible-sounding rationale for something serving a very different purpose. And this is where the story expands. Because this is not a Ferrari problem. It's not a Bugatti problem. It's not even a hypercar problem. Across the automotive and industrial world, the same pattern is playing out at scale. Motorcycle manufacturers locking diagnostic access behind proprietary dealer tools. Consumer electronics companies engineering devices that become unrepairable outside their own authorized networks. And most famously, most consequentially, agricultural equipment companies programming tractors so that the farmers who own them cannot repair them in the field without manufacturer authorization. John Deere spent years in a legal and political battle over exactly this. Farmers who had paid for their equipment outright, who depended on that equipment to work their land and sustain their livelihoods, found themselves stranded, unable to fix a machine they legally owned, because the software controlling it locked them out. The pattern repeats across industries. The technology changes. The mechanism stays the same. Control the repair ecosystem, and you control the customer long after the sale is complete. Now consider what this means for hypercars specifically, because the mechanical side of this story is only half of it. Modern hypercars are not primarily mechanical machines. They are computers. Sophisticated, deeply integrated electronic systems that happen to have an engine and wheels attached. The performance mapping, the suspension calibration, the hybrid battery management, the traction control, the launch sequencing, the regenerative braking curves, all of it runs through software. And that software is proprietary, locked behind encryption and authorization layers that only the manufacturer can fully access. Independent shops can't run the full diagnostic. They can't update the firmware. They can't reset electronic control modules after a component has been replaced. Which means even when an independent technician has the skill and has sourced the correct part, the car itself can refuse to cooperate. Not because the repair was wrong, but because the electronic system has flagged an unauthorized event and restricted certain functions until the manufacturer's system clears it. Owners have reported exactly this. A repaired vehicle that works, but doesn't fully work, not until it makes the trip back to an authorized facility so the software can be told that everything is sanctioned and approved. That raises a question worth sitting with. If a manufacturer can influence how your vehicle behaves after a repair, if the software architecture is deliberately designed so that the car enforces ongoing manufacturer control, do you actually own that machine? Or are you a licensed operator of something that, in the ways that matter most, never fully left the factory? That is not an abstract question. It's sitting in the driveways of some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they're beginning to notice. The right to repair movement has already won legislative ground in several areas. Agricultural equipment companies have faced genuine political pressure. Consumer electronics manufacturers have been forced to make meaningful concessions. The legal and regulatory landscape is shifting, and it is only a matter of time before that pressure reaches the automotive industry in a serious way. Independent rebuilders have become one of the clearest arguments in this entire debate. When someone purchases a damaged vehicle at salvage, sources legitimate manufacturer components, and rebuilds that car with their own hands and expertise, they are exercising what most people would consider a fundamental right of ownership. The car was purchased legally. The parts were sourced legitimately. The intent is restoration. But the manufacturer's system doesn't see it that way, because the moment that rebuild happens outside the authorized network, outside proprietary diagnostic software, without approved technicians signing off on every stage, the car steps outside the controlled ecosystem, which forces the question into sharp focus. If the vehicle title is in your name, if you paid every dollar of the asking price, why does another company retain the authority to determine how your property gets repaired? Think about it in different terms. Imagine buying a property, signing the deed, paying in full, and then discovering that the builder still holds the only master key. That every time something needed fixing, you had to call them, pay their rates, and wait for their schedule. You own the walls. You own the roof. But you don't control access to what you paid for. That is the version of ownership some hypercar manufacturers are quietly selling. And most buyers don't find out until the moment something goes wrong. The question of who truly owns these machines is no longer a philosophical curiosity. It's a legal, financial, and political question heading toward a reckoning. The manufacturers will have to answer it, either by choice or because they're eventually required to. And when that moment comes, the answer they give will reveal exactly what kind of relationship they were offering all along.